Okay, so the journey to the Underworld. This one's going to be probably a bigger one. We'll see how it goes. Again, I'm going to try to keep this simple, stupid. Let's just go to the overview first. Following Cersei's guidance, Odyssey sails to the edge of the world and performs a blood ritual at the entrance of Hades. Parentheses. Here we have Kerberos, Cerberus, the dog and all that stuff, Hades, and so on and so forth. Parentheses. Edge of the world. I don't know if some of you know this, but there are some pyramids, Aztec I think, or Maya, I think it's Aztec pyramids, where they have found little statues of the Cerberus, of the 2- and 3-headed dog, as guardians of the gate to Hades. Food for thought. Food for thought. Oh, but it's just a story. It's just fiction. It's just fiction. There's too many things lining up with regards to both symbolism and also reference to actual locations and actual things that the ancient Hellenes might have known a lot more about. And there is a lot of indications and a lot of other tales and a lot of myths as well, like the apples of the Hesperians. I think it's Hesperidon in Greek, which also Hesperia is pretty much, from what a lot of readings are concluding, America. But let's not go down that path. I'll just throw that in there because, everybody's like, it's just fiction. Okay. You do you, okay? Before I get into this, the more they hit us on the head with certain things and they keep saying certain lies over and over again to make them true, the more we're going to be making videos like this. And I got a lot more coming after I finish the whole, the whole synopsis and the whole analysis of the Odyssey. I got more videos coming to constantly hit people over the head with the counter argument of their lies. Like, if they think that they can keep saying, and I've said this in previous videos as well, if they think that they can make something true by repeating a certain lie over and over again and indoctrinating with it, well, they have another thing coming if they think that we're gonna not fight back with saying the truth over and over again until people have the juxtaposition of the two sides fighting with regards to misinformation and information. Now, he performs a blood ritual to the entrance of Hades. This summons many shades of the dead, and he speaks with several key figures. Now, the first key figure is Tiresias. He's the blind prophet, gives him crucial instructions and prophecies for the rest of the journey home. This is kind of the turning point with regards to how he actually starts to perceive the whole journey and how important it actually is with regards to his return and how he's supposed to follow along. Like, he has like a bit of a guidance here. Notice how what fed into this is also his lifestyle of luxury, or that seduction, let's just say, with Cersei. It granted him wisdom and strategies that actually made him grow. One could argue that all these trials are not necessarily bad, even in the first place. Like, especially once we start seeing that there's symbolisms, like the air and the winds teaching discipline, or the island with the giants, teaching of never being too comfortable, and every one of these other lessons. They're pretty much kind of like just showing you that these experiences are kind of like teaching you life lessons to a certain degree. So here's like the turning point where Odysseus gets a lot more information, let's just say, for his future journey and how he's supposed to go about it. And notice how Cersei, which could have been a temptation, he could have lost himself and be a swine as well and just, indulge in the food and all that stuff. Notice how the balance of that situation, which could have been something negative, was something very positive, and it bestowed upon him more information and wisdom and strategy moving forward. The blind prophet gives crucial instructions and prophecies for the rest of the journey home. Adiclia, his mother, she died from grief, waiting on him and updates about, situation. Ithaca, Penelope still faithful, Telemachus grown, suitors devouring the palace. That's another thing that, and also I think the prophet tells him as well. The prophet tells him certain things. I want to go into the detail of what he actually tells him. Then we have Achilles, his own kind of like experiences. This is like different stories from different kind of like perspectives of how they're actually experiencing their life in the afterlife, and what they could bestow in terms of a historical kind of recounting. It kind of symbolizes that one must face mortality, unresolved grief with his mother, hidden truths, history, the consequences of past actions, all these things are kind of like tied into this story here. And then it kind of shows that Odysseus temporarily enters the world of the dead, you might say, and kind of like, temporarily dies, and then gathers in wisdom from the dead, and then returns reborn for foresight for deeper understanding. Now, before I go into that symbolism there, because this is where it starts to get a little bit funky, I'm going to talk about some of the things that the prophet tells him. He says that he will eventually return home to Ithaca, but only after much more suffering. Okay, that pans out. He informs him of the suitors in the palace, eating his food and trying to marry Penelope. He tells him he must kill the suitors when he returns. That's his inner demons. He must cleanse himself. And then he says after that he must take a well-made oar and walk inland into the reaches until he reaches a people that they know nothing of the sea and have never seen an oar. There he must plant the oar in the ground and make sacrifice to Poseidon. That is, in a way and in a manner, kind of letting go of the past. And that is like the full final completion that, at the end of the journey, you reunite home, you reunite with your soul and everything. But there's still, at that point, the excitement of the adventure and being like, let's just go one more time. Let's just have at it once more. To be properly ascended and having a long-lasting life into your old ages and be peaceful, you have to let go of that old life. That's what it's symbolizing there. His oar, and he goes into a place where he changes his entire life, and then he just sacrifices it and he buries pretty much his old past. And then he says, only after completing the task will he ever have a peaceful old age and death. Another small parenthesis, he also specifically wants him to not harm the cattle of Helios. That's for a later trial. What can we derive from this? Some things that we can say about this. One of the metaphysical kind of interpretations here could be meditation. Now, I kind of made a small little parenthesis in one of the previous videos. It lended itself to the situation of the example that I wanted to use, and I kind of gave a little bit of a insight of me doing meditation back in the day. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I'm just going to say that it is very insightful. Let's just leave it at that. I would argue that at this point here, if we kind of juxtapose it again with the Eastern philosophies, but also there's a lot of ancient Greek references here and there. The crazy guy that used to fall asleep and used to come back and he used to give a description of what planet Earth looks like, and his description of what Earth looks like was strikingly similar to the images that we have now from outer space of planet Earth. Remote viewing. In some metaphysical circles, it's called astral channeling. Esoterical knowledge. Alignment with certain truths within that the soul is privy to. And once we actually align ourselves with those through meditation, we can actually see and discover certain things. I would argue here that we can have two kind of representations or symbolisms. One of them is that of reincarnation, for those that want to see it in that direction, that he dies at this point. He actually dies. And he, in certain metaphysical kind of if you want to call it scriptures. It's not exactly scriptures, but whatever, metaphysical beliefs. Once the soul dies, it reaches a point where it kind of comes together, and it comes together with a whole bunch of other souls and whatever. And a lot of the journey has been revealed, pasts have been revealed, a lot of information has been revealed, and then the new life, once it's been reborn at the whole point of reincarnation, it carries on those lessons from the previous life and how far it had gone to be reborn and then continue its trials in that next in that next incarnation. I'm leaning less towards that direction. There is a small hint of that symbolism here, but I'm not really buying that with regards to this to the way that I would interpret it and the way that I would understand that this text is going. I don't think it's going in that direction, talking about reincarnation at all, but it is, for some people, I guess, perhaps one way that they could combine it. The end result is the same. As you will notice at the end of this, it's the same. It doesn't really change anything. It's just that I'm trying to add more flavors to all this so we can actually create an even larger kind of scope and view of this entire trial, which is a pretty hectic, I would say, and important trial. The other interpretation that we can have here is that of diving deep into meditation. Now, it says that, he's Odysseus temporarily dies to the living world, and he gathers wisdom from the dead. One could argue that it's not really the dead; it's the more alive, the souls, and it's the Akashic record, as in other references again, or the spirits, the souls, the eternal, the light, whatever the case may be, whatever religion you believe in, whatever kind of path of metaphysical, non-metaphysical, direction you actually go to. We have the living plane, and then we have the spiritual plane. I would argue that it's leaning more towards that direction. He had a very profound internal kind of like meditative state, or if you don't want to call it meditation, because it might not have been meditation, it could have been a completely different state. Some states were induced also, and very common in ancient Greece with regards to a lot of the oracles, and they will get into certain trance states, and they will, search for and seek for certain information and whatnot. These planes of the dead, basically, they're considered the planes of the dead. It's, the non-material. And I would argue that in meditation, yes, similar to this, you can deep dive and find of a lot more of information which your own soul or even other entities that you might contact, which, by the way, you have to be careful with what entities you come in contact with. So I hear. It gets a little bit funky here. That's what I said. This trial here gets a little bit funky and starts to point into certain directions that some people might not be very comfortable with this, with the description of this trial. However, it is pretty. Again, it's not far-fetched, and it's not a stretch, because it's right there in the text. It says it right there that he died and he came back. He was dead to the living. Like he descends to the underworld. This is clearly symbolizing something. What exactly is it symbolizing? Well, I'll leave it up to you. I'm just giving you certain directions and certain ideas of what it could be talking about. I would argue that the deepest, the most accurate representation of that could be a deep dive into spiritual knowledge, kind of like we do with meditation, but it could be in a different form as well, in a different way of experiencing that, where he was in contact, let's just say, or in alignment with his inner self, kind of like with Hermes before. And this is where he has a lot of revelations. There is a proverb, I think that's what it's called, a proverb or a phrase, where it says, "In prayer I talk to God, in meditation God talks to me." Now this is all really leaning into that direction. I mean, he goes into the underworld, he starts getting all this information, he gets closure on a lot of stuff, and he gets closure on history. He finds out truths that he wasn't there to experience. He finds out about these truths, kind of like astral channeling or remote viewing, or really getting into another state where you're starting to really connect with the different fabric of existence, such as the soul, which the soul is timeless. It's without time, and it's without. It does not belong in space and time. It breaks the rules of time and space. That's why some people have visions of things that might happen in the future, or they might experience being at a certain place and seeing certain things without actually being there, and yet they actually see those events. Whatever the case may be, that is the timeless point of the way that the soul exists, pretty much, for the most part. So all that really does resonate and lean into that direction. He had a very profound spiritual moment in this situation, and it was revealed to him in those moments what he's supposed to do. So up to this point, he's fighting his trials, he's trying to get better, he's trying to learn discipline, he's trying to learn of ego, he's trying to learn of using his wit, he's trying to learn of getting away from comfort, and all these other lessons and so on and so forth. And then he finds the balance between the material world and getting wisdom from it, and pretty much uniting with it, with Circe and all these things, until he finally, we see like it slowly escalates, and it reaches a point where he couldn't have gone to this state without having first experienced the other trials. And once he was ready for that inner dive, that's when he has some extra revelations with regards to what he's supposed to do, what his journey is, and like the epiphany, let's just say. Like sometimes you have certain people that are like, oh, I had a vision, or I know what I'm supposed to do now in my life, or whatever else the case may be. We have seen those in historical situations a lot of times, and even in our current day, there are people that they swear on their own lives that they have these experiences. Now, how cynical we want to be with regards to believing people's personal experiences or not, because we have a lot of people that are like, oh, that's just made up. It's kind of like, eating a banana. Okay, I can never explain to you what the taste of a banana is. You have to taste it yourself to understand it. And unfortunately, some of these things, a lot of people, they just can't accept because they don't have the experience. I'll just leave it at that. Debasing other human beings' experiences out there because you haven't had the experience, that is as low as it gets. And it kind of coincides with, I think Socrates had said this, or I could be wrong, but I think it was Socrates, where he says, lower level minds, they discuss other people. Like they gossip. Middle or medium level minds, they discuss events. Things that have happened. They're a little bit more elevated, social, political, whatever you want them to be. Wars, whatnot. Higher level or more elevated minds speak of ideas. And another proverb or phrase, I think it's Stoicism, I could be wrong, or it could be one of those philosophers again, where it says that the wise man learns from other people's mistakes. It's not just other people's mistakes, it's other people's experiences, which just shows the level of intellect that some people have when they see other people's experiences or other people's, evaluations, and they debase them into nothing because they have none of those experiences. So they can't learn anything from them, and they can't really even, they don't have to experience them, but they can have it as food for thought. But they don't even want that. They neglect it even as food for thought. Okay? Much less be able to understand from other people's experiences, and much less be at that point where they're actually talking about ideas, an elevated mind. And in ideas, what are we doing? We are doing just that. Free thinking, open thought. We are exploring and experimenting with ideas. And what is an idea? It can be anything. The deeper you dive, the more it reveals itself to you, and the more you're able to analyze certain elements and certain things in life itself. A little bit of a harder, possibly a bit of a darker kind of trial with regards to symbolism. It's not that straightforward, I would argue, and there can be some several interpretations in there, but at the same time, it is pretty obvious and pretty straightforward as well. It is pretty straightforward. He did obviously, as what the story is telling us, what the story is actually symbolizing, he went into a situation where he lived death, or he lived the afterlife, or he lived something that was outside of the living material world, which can be by extension the spiritual world, which obviously is where the soul resides and where all that information is. And again, when you juxtapose it with other religions and other beliefs, it is the deep dive within which that state he had some profound knowledge that was bestowed upon him, which helped him on his journey moving forward after that. Whoa, I wasn't actually that long, was it? I was expecting it to be a much larger video. I think that's pretty much the gist of it. Let me look at my notes. The oar represents Odysseus' entire identity as a seafarer, warrior, and wanderer. Planting it far from the sea symbolizes laying down the old tools of his former life. It is the final act of letting go of the stormy, adventurous phase so he can achieve a peaceful old age on land. Something steady, something grounded. His return. I guess that's the only other thing that I had here. The rest of it is some notes for what happens later on the island of Helios, Ilios. So I think that pretty much covers it all. Yeah, actually that was shorter than I expected it to be. It's pretty good. We're keeping good pace. Yeah, that's the Underworld, the Trial of the Underworld. I'm just going to call it the Trial of the Underworld. Kind of lends itself right away into the symbolism as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you all in the next one, and until then, peace be with you.